All right. Hi, everybody. I guess you can hear me because you waved, so that's good news. So welcome. My name is Kathy Salisbury. I'm the director of the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University. And just to test out your Zoom skills after all these years of using Zoom, I am going to ask you to give me a thumbs up if you have been to the Arboretum before. And see if you can manage the thumbs up. Yeah, there we go. Yes, I can see the thumbs up and actual thumbs. That works too. Excellent. All right. So I see there's some folks who haven't figured out how to give the thumbs up. But so we are in Upper Dublin Township. We are the 187 acre satellite campus of Temple University, and we have a number of display gardens and collections. And so what we're going to do today, I'm going to show you a quick video about the Arboretum, just for those of you who may not be familiar or haven't visited. And then we'll get started on this Botanical Latin program and talk a little bit more about the scientific names of plants. So so I'll start with the video and then we'll go from there. Let's see if I can make this happen.
Kathy, there's no audio.
That's okay. It's just music, so it's all right if it's not coming through. I forgot that setting of having it listen to the computer, so just be quiet for a little bit. Thank you. Oops, now I just stopped it altogether. Sorry about that. This is what I get for trying to mess around with it. Are you guys seeing the video? You can,
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, people. Okay, try this again. So that just gives you a little bit, oops, sorry, about the Arboretum in case you've never been. Also, that was a pandemic project of mine when we were in lockdown and couldn't leave the house. And so that was created before the tornado that hit here. And so some of those photos, the areas look different now, but we are still in the process of recovering, but still are open to the public for exploration, and the gardens are beautiful thanks in great part to the wonderful staff I have, and then also a great number of volunteers that help out on a regular basis and with planting, weeding, watering, and everything to help keep everything looking beautiful. And we're still moving on with some new gardens in the works. And so we'd love for you to come and take a tour and visit and bring groups. And if you're interested, I think we're running a field trip in June through the Parks Department to have a tour here of the Arboretum. So we're going to talk about botanical Latin. And so these are the scientific names of plants. And what I'd like to do just in the next couple of minutes, for those of you who can or are interested, I'd like you to just search the web, if you're able to, for the scientific name of your favorite whatever. So you would Google scientific name of or Latin name of, and then enter in, sunflower or purple dart frog or whatever it is that is your favorite whatever. And then just put in the chat your what you were looking up, and then the scientific name of that. You should be able to just copy and paste that into the chat. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So Melinda, you have actually found a family. So that is not the scientific name of that individual. So you have to kind of, I guess there's lots of different kinds of sea turtles. And so you have to be more specific about which kind of sea turtle, like loggerhead, or I don't know what any other ones are, but that'll give you a scientific name. But you found a family name, which is interesting. We'll talk about what that means. Nice. I see Carolina allspice, Calycanthus floridus, river birch, Betula nigra, Syringa vulgaris, the lilac. Excellent. Oh, Digitalis purpurea, foxglove. Nice. Great. So you're finding it. So if you searched for a plant, search for an animal or your favorite something else, just to find another type of scientific name. Let's see, tiger lily. That's a new one to me. Lily eucalani lancifolium. Red-tailed hawk. Yep. Nice. All right, so hopefully people can see. Yes. It's an unfortunate scientific name, I think, Monica, for the robin. The genus. It's not, I don't know. Red fox, Vulpes. I believe that red fox is Vulpes vulpes. So it has the same genus and species name, which is actually something that can happen in the animal kingdom, but cannot happen in the plant kingdom. The rules for naming plants, they cannot have the same genus and species, but in animals, you do find that frequently, the same genus and species. Yep, Vulpes vulpes. Great. So you can kind of see, just get an idea of just the different types of words for the for the robin, you can see there, Turdus is how I would pronounce it, migratorius. And so that might tell you something about the animal, right? What word do you see in there that might tell you some information about this particular animal? Oh, yeah, that they migrate. Very good. So so we find that with scientific names that some of them can give you some information about what you're looking at, about the species that you're trying to learn more about. Thanks for spell checking that, Melinda. I was thinking that something had changed scientific names and I didn't know. And that happens too. And we're going to talk about why that happens as well. Sometimes we come across a scientific name that's not valid anymore, or in my case, as a person who studied horticulture and plant identification and has taught it for years, plant names sometimes change over time. And we'll talk about why that is. So sometimes I'm surprised, like, this has a new name. And sometimes I'll learn it, and sometimes I'll just stick with what I knew and and not learn it. It depends. So you get an idea. So if you're, and the point of this is not only to see the types of scientific names that are out there and the words that are used on it, but also to show you how to look up scientific names. If you ever wanted to, all you have to do is just Google scientific name of, and I'll talk about why sometimes they're called Latin names, and I'll talk about why that's not exactly accurate, and scientific name is more so. But we're going to talk today a little bit about the science of taxonomy. So that taxonomy is that science of identifying, naming, and classifying plants. And basically, this is how all of our scientific names came to be, is through the process of practicing taxonomy on living things. So, and it's all these living things that have scientific names, but we're talking in particular about plants, of course. And then, of course, there's nomenclature. So when we're talking about scientific names, this idea of binomial nomenclature is, or this is what we use. So those scientific names are binomial. So they generally have two names, a genus and a species, and we'll talk about that. So nomenclature is the practice of naming plants. And then binomial nomenclature is this Latin-based system. In the beginning, it was a Latin-based system in which each species is given a pair of two unique names. And Carl Linnaeus, who you may have heard of, is credited with developing this system. And sometimes these names are called Latin names, and more correctly, they're called scientific names now, because in reality, as more and more people are naming these plants, they're less and less based in actual Latin. And so they could have Greek derivations or any number of things. We're going to talk about some other ways that plants get named. So we call them scientific names rather than Latin names. So why Latin names? Why do these plants have these unique names? So if you could write in the chat, why do you think, why don't we just call everything? Why do they have these special names instead of just being called a tulip and a pine and that kind of thing? What do you think? They help identify the family, the genus of plants. Yep. So everyone in the world can know what plant is being referred to. Yep. And it started naming when Latin was an active language. That's correct as well. Good. So up until the mid 1700s, all plant names were given locally and used locally. So it was just that plant community that the people were in. They had specific names of their plants, and that's how they communicated about them. There was no universally accepted naming or naming convention for anything, really. And it just was, everything was happening locally. And we can even think of that as indigenous cultures, as first peoples who used land, and stewarded land in an area, they developed a relationship with the plants in their communities and named them and communicated about them in their way. So we can think of it that way. And then Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus came along and is credited for inventing this dual name system that's still used around the world today. At the time, as Melinda noted, he used Latin because it was a universal language used by scientists at the time. So that's the way everybody communicated in the scientific world at the time. So he used Latin for this reason. And then he created this system to classify a wide array of plants and animals. In fact, he named us, probably, I was trying to think of scientific names that people already know. If you know Homo sapien, that's the scientific name for us. That's genus and species for us humans. So Homo is the genus for man, and sapien is Latin for wise or intelligent. And so that's what Linnaeus designated us. Imagine you get to name the race of people or you get to name humans. And these names are unique no matter where you go. So we can talk plants with people anywhere in the world if you're using scientific names. So you might say bluebell, and in one area of the country that means one plant, or one area of the world that means one plant, and another area of the world that means an entire different plant. Here you might think of Virginia bluebells, the native ones, and in Europe you might think of bluebells, which are the bulbs that you plant that bloom early in the spring, Scilla, and those types of things. So if you want to talk plants, you can, there's just one of these plant names per plant around the globe. So if you say Mertensia virginica for Virginia bluebells, then there's only one of those. Common names, which is what we know, like we know a lot of plants by their common names. So Norway spruce, red maple, sugar maple, those are common names, and they remain and change from region to region. So I'll give a couple of examples of plants that have a ton of different common names depending on the region where you encounter them. And so those will change, and they're not universal. So if you go and try to talk to somebody in even a different part of this country, let alone a different part of the world, and you're using common names, there may be some confusion about what you're actually talking about. So sometimes these scientific names can help you understand a little bit more about the plant itself, although this isn't always the case, it can be. So for example, Acer rubrum is red maple, and rubrum means red. And when you're looking at a red maple, the buds are red in the early spring, the flowers are red when it blooms in early spring, the petioles, the leaf stem, are red. It turns a red fall color. So it makes sense that this has that the scientific name of rubrum, because so much of the detail and the features of this plant are red. So that does help with identification. Or it can tell you about the culture. So one of the words might be aquatica, and that gives you an idea that it likes wet feet or tolerates wet soils or happens to be in wet areas. So you can learn that about it too. So that's why we have these scientific names or these Latin names. So I'm going to start with an example that I like to use when I teach this for my classes. And this is Chamaecyparis piscifera. I like to start with a nice, complicated scientific name for my students. So this is the saguaro cypress. And the photos that you see here are of this plant in the wild. So this is how this plant would look if you went and found it in its natural habitat. It's a large tree, multi-stemmed, big trunks, Chamaecyparis piscifera, or the saguaro cypress. So, and I'll talk about what these are. So when we're looking at a scientific name, it's usually two words. The first word is the genus, and the second word is the species. And generally, you'll notice throughout my presentation, the scientific names are in italics. And when we communicate about them in writing, generally they're italicized or underlined. And that's how you know it's a scientific name, besides the fact that it's in some what looks like a foreign language. And this is basically like learning a foreign language. I try to remind my students of that because they come in and sometimes it's their first horticulture class, and here they are being expected to remember these strange names. And it is a skill, just like learning another language. It's like French or German or something. There's a skill and practice to it. So you have this genus and then the species, Chamaecyparis piscifera, and then you see underneath it that saguaro cypress is the common name. And we'll talk about how this Chamaecyparis piscifera came about too, generally. But there's more than just two names sometimes that you encounter when you're looking at a plant. So if you purchase a plant, it has a tag on it, you might see more names on there. And so you have some other options. So what we were looking at was the genus and the species. So the genus is a group of plants that share structural characteristics. And at this point in time, they also share, they may be clumped together because they share genetic similarities that you can't see in the field. So when Linnaeus was starting to name all these things, he was going out into the field and he was lumping them together based on observable characteristics in the field, usually based on reproductive structures. So when there were similarities between reproductive structures of the plants, he would lump them together in families and then discern them even further to get them down to the genus and the species. And now genetics and genetic mapping plays a big role in this as well. So it is generally a noun, and the names could come from mythology, from literature, from a resemblance, from you could be named after the botanist's best friend. You know, there's all kinds of ways that a genus gets determined. A species is generally an adjective. It's something, it has been something that describes the plant to make it more distinctive from, you know, what separates it from the whole of the family. What is that special characteristic? And I'll show you some examples of these too. Sometimes it's named after a place. So you'll see like Virginiana a lot or Pennsylvanica a lot. And that isn't necessarily where it's native to, although it can be. It could be where it was found or discovered for the first time, where the biggest populations are. So just because it says Pennsylvanica or Virginiana doesn't mean that that's the only place it occurs. It's just part of the descriptor. It could be part of its appearance, like rubrum means red, aurea is gold, something like that. It could be sometimes with herbs and those types of plants, you'll see officinalis a lot as a species name. So you'll see Salvia officinalis or Calendula officinalis, and that usually means that it has medicinal properties and has been used as medicine by a culture. And so that tells you something about it. And then variety, there's these other subdivisions beyond that continue to narrow down what this plant is. So there's a variety, which is a subdivision of the species. And there are naturally occurring changes that make this plant just a little bit different. And so just separates it apart. And usually these differences happen because of a, let's say, an ecological difference in population. So one population is maybe of this plant is growing on mountains, and another population of this plant is growing in valleys, or one is growing in the northern part of the United States and one's growing in the southern. They're the same species, but they've developed these just little bit of differences. And then they'll separate that out even further. So you may see variety. Cultivar is cultivated variety. So that has been developed by humans. And so you'll see cultivars, and these are usually in quotes, single quotes on the plant tag name indicates that it's a cultivar. So these are generally bred for characteristics that we are looking for as humans: ornamental, disease resistance, cold tolerance, those kinds of things, and then given a new name because they've created this different type of plant from the genus and the species. The genus and the species is what you would find in the wild, just growing in its native habitat. Generally, that's a genus and the species. All of these are adaptations or changes or genetic diversity that happens in the wild. And then hybrids are created through human intervention, and are crosses that might not happen in nature and create a distinctively new plant. So if you're crossing two species together, that's called an interspecific hybrid. If you're crossing two genera together, two genus, that's called an intergeneric hybrid. Intergeneric hybrids are much more rare than interspecific hybrids. You find those a lot. So that sounds overwhelming. So I want to take us now to this plant. So if we remember here, this is Chamaecyparis piscifera, this giant tree that grows out in the wild, these big trunks. So take a look at this one. You've probably seen this type of plant in landscapes. It is the plant of banks, parking lots, and apartment complexes. You just see them, shopping centers. You see these quite a bit. And so this is Chamaecyparis piscifera, and then notice in quotes, Folifera aurea nana. So this is the scientific name of this plant. And that is our dwarf gold mop cypress. So this is little and yellow and rounded and hunched over and looks very, very different than that one that you find in the wild. So a lot of manipulation has gone on to make this plant look this way, but it all started from that original type of plant, right? So here's our scientific name of false cypress. And I've sort of dissected this. I don't know if you all remember in English class, you used to have to dissect sentences. Do you remember that? I used to love doing that. Such a nerd. But so here's this dissected, the scientific name dissected. So the word Chamaecyparis is the Latin name for false cypress. So sometimes that word, that genus, is just the word for that genus. That's just what it is. It was created just for that. Piscifera means pea-like, and that refers to the fruits on this. The cones are very small and about the size of a pea, and they're generally green. So it gives you some descriptors. Folifera is thread-like, and that refers to the long branchlets on here of very tightly pressed scale needles together, and that make it look like threads. Aurea means gold, and nana means dwarf. And so if you translate all of this, it's a false cypress with thread-like branches, pea-like fruits, that's gold and small in size, right? That's what that whole thing translates to. So this particular scientific name can give you a lot of information about this plant if you understand what the words are telling you. And then of course this gold, dwarf gold mop cypress is the common name for this, which is also fairly descriptive. So again, Chamaecyparis piscifera folifera aurea nana, so fun to say, is the scientific name. We have the genus and the species. It's always italicized. The genus is always capitalized. This is just when we're communicating about it as, I mean, how you guys can do whatever you want to do, but this is how we communicate about it. And then the species is always lowercase. And sometimes this is called the species or the specific epithet. And then this is a cultivar. It's in single quotes. So when you look at your plant names on the tags, if you buy the plants or are out a nursery or even Googling something, if it's in single quotes, that generally means that this is a cultivar. So this is something that's been bred for specific characteristics and not generally italicized. And again, stands for cultivated variety. And then the common name here. So here's just an example of one that we have in the Arboretum. This is our long stalk holly. So you might look at this and not think holly at all. In fact, without fruit on it, it looks pretty much like a ficus houseplant. You wouldn't think, you think holly has these spiky leaves and is shiny dark green and has red fruits. But so ilex is the scientific name for the genus holly. And then pedunculosa, a peduncle is the stem of the fruit of a plant, right? So however that fruit is attached is called the peduncle. One of my favorite horticulture words. We used to get to say persistent peduncle. It's just fun. So, but this this is telling you that there's something special about this peduncle. And really this holly has the longest stems of any flowers and fruit that we commonly see in our gardens when it comes to hollies. So of all the hollies, this one has the longest stems for the fruit. So by knowing what a peduncle is, you can know that Ilex pedunculosa has something special going on with that, and that can help you with identifying it when you see it out in the field. So they can give you some information. So where did these scientific names come from? How do we get to the particular words that we're using in the particular order that we're using them? And again, we said that they could be named after a best friend, where you found them, but here is, you've probably learned this at some point in your schooling in biology, that you have this kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I always was taught to remember this. King Philip called out for good soup, but maybe you all learned something else. And so this system of dividing all these living things that were being found into groups was developed. And then in plant identification, individuals are assigned to a descending series of related plants based on these known characteristics. So you start out with this big, with my students, I try to explain it like, if you think about your entire family, second cousins, everybody all together, we're kind of starting there and then separating them out based on characteristics, similar characteristics, until you get to individuals. So if you can imagine, in my class, I will have students start to observe characteristics. And so we'll separate our class is the whole, and then we separate into people who wear glasses and people who don't wear glasses, and that kind of thing, until we have individual who might be a brown hair, blue-eyed, sweater wearing person who's wearing glasses and Chuck Taylor sneakers. And then you can point to that person and know that that's that individual, that's the species level. And that's sort of how plants get down to their individuals. So again, often these characteristics were observable in the field, but now they're getting more into the DNA. The collage here, the illustration here, shows the 6 kingdoms into which all of Earth's living things are classified. And so we're dealing with a plant kingdom here, but everything that's in these kingdoms has these scientific names. So every living thing has these scientific names. So there's millions and millions of these scientific names out there. 2 million living species have already been identified, and new species are being identified every day, which means that new scientific names are being added, which is pretty incredible. There's so much we don't know yet, but it also provides this opportunity for some wacky plant naming, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. Scientists estimate there might be as many as 30 million different living species on Earth. So that means there's, 28 million we don't know anything about yet. So, and haven't been identified. So far, they fit all into these 6 kingdoms. But as many of you may have learned that there were 5 kingdoms. When we first learned these, there was only 5, and they've since added a 6th kingdom, something that was so different that it didn't fit into any existing kingdoms. So, so these names are changing depending on new discoveries all the time as well. So there's an organization called the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature, and there's also an International Plant Names Index that provides guidelines for standardizing plant names based on scientific evidence. There are rules for naming things. I mentioned in the animal kingdom, you can have a repetition between the genus and the species. So you can have red fox, which is Vulpes vulpes. In plant naming convention and rules, there's no duplication like that. You cannot have a genus and a species that are the same word. So they're different depending on what kingdom you're dealing with. And then the people who are developing the rules for the different kingdoms may be different as well. Didn't know it was so involved, right? So, so there are rules out there. So this is just to show you sort of how we get to our scientific names. So you can see the family is Rosaceae, the genus is Rosa, and then the species is Rosa eglanteria. And And then subspecies, varieties, and cultivars, we've kind of already talked about. What you see, what they look like. This should be in single quotes too. So when it comes to scientific names, naming after people has been a thing. So this is Jeffersonia diphylla. This is named for Thomas Jefferson. And diphylla, this is twin leaf. You can see here, the leaves, they're double, right? Here. And so they almost look like angel wings or wings out there. So this is twin leaf, again, named for Thomas Jefferson. Franklinia alatamaha is named for Benjamin Franklin. So John Bartram found this tree and decided to name it after his really good friend, Benjamin Franklin, just as an honor. So there's many ways that plants could get these scientific names. The Alatamaha part is named for the river that this was found along. It's actually a typo. They misspelled the name of the river in the scientific name, but once somebody submits a scientific name for publication and it's been published, it's almost impossible to get it changed. So it is spelled with a typo. And you'll see that with Pennsylvanica a lot, where it only has one N. I'll show you that too. So this is the Franklin tree. And then this trend continues to this day. So there are some scientists out there that named a brand new moth species after Donald Trump. And so this is the official name of this moth. And the genus already existed, but the species was a brand new species. And this scientist named it this way because the head of this moth, they thought, resembled Donald Trump's hairdo with all of these scales, the light colored scales over there. So I was reading up on this, and there's a kind of worm-like creature that buries its head in the sand, that somebody found it, determined it was a new species, and then sold the naming rights for $25,000. So whoever could come up with $25,000 could then name that brand new species. And they also named it after Donald Trump. And then there's ones named after Obama and presidents all down through history. There's insects and plants and all kinds of things named after them. So that's some of the genesis for these names. This really tells you nothing about this insect, I guess, if you don't know about Donald Trump. Hairdo doesn't really tell you anything about it. So it all depends. And scientific names change. So why do you think, if you want to put in the chat, why do you think why scientific names may change? So here's scientific names. When I learned this plant, I learned it as Myrica pennsylvanica. And this is bayberry is the name of this. It's a native shrub, has these great waxy blue fruits that are super fragrant. If you're familiar with the holiday scent of bayberry, like bayberry candles, this is what it smells like. Important for wildlife. I learned it. I grew up not far from the Jersey Shore, and so this was a sand dune plant for me that I would see all the time, all over the place. I grew up in the Pine Barrens, so this grew in the sandy soils all over the place. I learned it as Myrica pennsylvanica when I went to school. When I started teaching here and teaching this plant in other situations, it had changed to Morella pennsylvanica, and now it's back. It's changed back to Myrica pennsylvanica. So I'm wondering why you think why plant names might change, if you have some thoughts about that. New information about the reproductive structure. Yeah, that is one way. So as scientists continue to look more and more closely at plants, not only through the genetics, the DNA, but through just understanding plants better and having better ways to look very closely at structures, they're noticing that maybe what they thought was closely related actually isn't, or what was really similar actually isn't. And so they move plants to different families, and then because of that end up giving them different names, or they find that they're more aligned with another genus that's already established and they lump them in with that genus. Yep, with technology, same reason. We know more about the plant characteristics and genetics, so they move to a different name. Exactly, so they do that. Also, if you remember, when we talked about when this first started happening in the 1700s, we didn't have the global communication that we have now, right? So, or even what we consider short distances, like between us and Georgia, back then, people in Georgia have same plants as we do up here, but they're calling it one thing and we're calling it another thing. And so people were giving scientific names to plants in two different areas without realizing they were giving the same scientific name to the same, or the different scientific name to the same plant. Does that make sense? So they were finding something. So people in Georgia were finding something and saying, hey, this isn't named, and giving it a scientific name. And then people up here in Northeast Pennsylvania were finding the same plants, giving it a scientific name, not realizing that somebody had already done that. And so once we were able to communicate more easily about this, we realized there's duplications. And so you had to change that name because two plants cannot have the same name. So then they had to change. So that's where you find two. But now it's more likely that it's this new finding of genetics that is causing this changes in names. In fact, so here, this is a very distressing slide, the next one to me. These are all the new names that everything that used to be called aster, which was nice, simple, easy scientific name. So whatever used to be Aster cordifolius or Aster divaricatus or Aster ericoides or Aster laevis or Aster nova angli or Aster nova belgi, you get it, have now changed to these names. And notice that Aster is not used in any of these anymore, but these are the new scientific names for these plants. And this is a lot based on DNA evidence and who's more closely related and who's not as related as they thought they were at all, and just moving them to an entirely different genus. They're all in the same family still, but they've moved different genus. And in my opinion, made them far more complicated. And, I know one nursery that just refuses to change them to these. They're just asters and they're not doing it. So you can see changes a lot. And then there's some scientific names. I think this scientific name sums it all up. This is an actual scientific name. This is Thingia ambigua, right? So it has a synonym for Claytonia ambigua, but this is one of the accepted plant names, or the accepted plant name for this particular plant. And this sums up exactly what goes on in scientific plant name world, where there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of questioning about how plants got their names, who's related to who in hybrids, what the parentage was. There's all kinds of discussions about this. And so I would say, we want to learn plant names. The scientific names are really important, I think, to learn. I was having this discussion. I did a hooky day, not a hooky day. I took a day off yesterday and went snowboarding while there's still snow, like for the 3 snowflakes that fell so far this year. And the person I was on the lift with, we were talking about this. He's not in this world. And he's like, nobody cares about scientific names. Everybody just needs to know the common name. You don't need to know the plant. I might have been telling him the scientific names of the plants we were passing on the chairlift. Might have been doing that because that's what I do. He's like, nobody cares. And I was trying to explain why it's so important. And it's because, there's only one, but the truth is that they change and they're flexible. And so, you just have to, I think, look them up, go through research. I'm going to show you where the best resource is for finding the scientific names, the accepted ones. Because depending on the books you use, depending on the resources you have, you might be looking at a synonym instead of the accepted name at this point. So there's 2 places. One is called the World Flora Online, and then the other one is called Plants of the World Online. So when we're going to put a label on a plant at the Arboretum, we want to make sure we're using the most recent up-to-date accepted name by the scientific community. And these are the 2 places that we will check with to make sure that the name that we're thinking that it should be, for example, Liriodendron tulipifera for tulip tree, is the accepted name and it's not a synonym and there's a new name change. This is where you can go and find that, because when you look up a name, it'll tell you if it's a synonym or not, and it'll tell you what the accepted name is on either of those sites. So that's our source of the information. So we talked about why scientific names. So here's just some examples. So this is Liriodendron tulipifera. This is the scientific name for tulip tree, which is a very common tree around us. Has these beautiful flowers. It's named for the tulipifera means tulip bearing. So you can see the flower here of the tulip tree, how it looks like a tulip shape and is colorful like a tulip, or coloration like a tulip. And then Liriodendron is just Greek, again, not Latin. It's Greek for lily tree. So you can just see how it gets its name, but here's all the common names: tulip tree, tulip poplar, yellow poplar, fiddle tree, whitewood, canoe wood. Depending on who's using it, what culture is talking about it, and the location, you could run into all these different common names. And if somebody came up to me and asked me about canoe wood, I would have no idea what they were talking about. But if they said Liriodendron tulipifera, I could at least look it up and get an understanding of what they are talking about, because there's only one of those. And same thing here with Carpinus caroliniana, which is called American hornbeam, blue beech, ironwood, and musclewood, depending on what references you're looking at. So this is why scientific names come in very handy, because there's only one Carpinus caroliniana. The advantages to using the scientific names, knowing them and having them, is that they're unique. We talked about that. They're universal. We talked about that. Maybe they might be easier to remember, the shorter ones. I don't know. Relatively stable and reliable. They don't change that much, even though they do. Some do and some have. Generally, given the millions of names out there, that it doesn't happen very often. And then there is a governing body that monitors these names, and there are rules that are followed for these names, unlike common names. And then some challenges to this system. They're synonyms. So there are a lot of names that are cross-referenced with the accepted name. So there is renaming that happens. The time when they were named, so the era in which they are named, they might not have had the resources they have available now, and also the cultural situations may have been different. So there's a lot of problematic scientific names and common names in the plant world and the other kingdoms, just with our history of colonization and ignoring indigenous cultures and slavery. There are common names and scientific names that harken back to those that are really problematic, but it is difficult to change scientific names. There are groups out there that are working to change the accepted common names to get some of them out of use and get new ones into use, but the scientific names are much harder to change. And so, but this is something that is talked about and discussed in our world of scientific plant names. And then, interestingly, binomials, that genus and species, is only unique within a kingdom. So it is possible that you could have an animal and a plant with the same exact scientific name. So that can be problematic. So if you want to understand what scientific names mean, there's this website called the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder, or MOBOT Plant Finder, and it gives great information about these plants, but also gives you the information of how the scientific name translates, what it translates to, what it means. So we talked about Chamaecyparis piscifera. And so you can see Chamaecyparis means dwarf, and it comes from Greek, meaning dwarf cypress tree. And then the species comes from pea, like cones, right? Pea-shaped cones. So that sometimes helps my students to understand and remember scientific names, understanding the definitions and reading about them. So that's a great resource for that. That's the best one I found so far that pretty consistently tells you what the Latin or the scientific name means. And then what most people are concerned about is how to pronounce them, the scientific names. And that's what my students are always anxious about, because we do a lot of discussion and talking out in the field about what these scientific names are. And I ask them, what this is, and to answer in scientific names, and they're hesitant because they seem complicated. But what I always say is to say it with confidence. because most people don't know how it's pronounced. And a lot of people worry about pronunciation, but any pronunciation is fine. Just go for it. Just say it with confidence. Most people you're talking to probably don't know the right way to pronounce it anyway. And Latin, botanical Latin, isn't a real language at all. So the fact that the idea that there might be rules that you need to follow to pronounce it is just out the window, because the words are made up in a lot of cases. There's no reason. It used to be, well, there's Latin, there's pronunciation rules for pronouncing Latin, but it doesn't apply. This is just a system of nomenclature invented by a person a long time ago. So how do you pronounce something that is the words of a language that doesn't belong to any one nation or people or isn't used anymore? You just pronounce it any way you like. The part is to go with confidence and just go for it. Just try it. So that's what I recommend. But again, on this MoBot site that I want to send you to that has all the information on it and tells you about the scientific names, you'll see this little speaker here underneath the plant name. You can press on that and it'll pronounce it for you. Horticulture Magazine, any plants that they discuss in their edition or their volume of their magazine, they have a pronunciation guide spelled out phonetically for you. So that can help too. You can find that online as well. Oregon State Landscape Plants also has a pronunciation button for you. If you go on there, you can listen to them that way. My students use TikTok, which I had no idea there was plant stuff on TikTok because I'm not on there. But they found all these scientists who do little short videos about plants on TikTok, and they listen to them pronounce the scientific name, and that has helped them out. So there's all kinds of resources out there for you, but I challenge you to just go for it. Just try it out. Just say it with confidence. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. If there was something you were hoping to get out of this class that I didn't give to you, I'm happy to address that, hopefully, and invite you to come and learn more in the gardens with us at the Arboretum. I'm looking at the chat to see if there's any questions. But thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. It's nice to be able to have these temple talks with the Parks Department. Oh, when something says heirloom, what does that mean? So generally heirloom refers to the fact that it is an older hybrid, or it's something that hasn't had a lot of change to it in generations. So think of it as sort of like vintage. And a lot of times too, when you think of heirloom, so it's probably still a hybrid or a cultivar of some sort, but a lot of times heirloom things don't have disease resistance. They don't have maybe cold tolerance or something like that, but they have much more flavor or much more fragrance. And that's generally what you'll see when is heirloom. It's just that it means just a very old variety that's been around for a long, long time. Good question. Can I see the hybrid description chart again? Sure. Let's see if I can do that. It's a backwards review. This one? So there's the hybrid description chart. Any other questions? And this is recorded, so it'll be posted through the Parks Department, so you can go back and reference it. And I'm very easily accessible. You can reach me at arboretum@temple.edu if you ever have any questions about plants or whatever. I'm happy to answer them or help you find the answer to them. So, do variety cultivars and hybrids all get listed with the generally it's the cultivars, and a cultivar basically is a name for the hybrid. So so when we see it in single quotes, it's the cultivar name, but generally cultivars are hybrids. or a lot of times they are. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, appreciate it. All right, everybody. Have a good rest of your day, and hope to see you in the gardens.